In the autumn of 1876, a gravedigger named Elias Morrow descended into a mound outside Chillicothe, Ohio, that had been sealed, by order of the county surveyor, for 11 years. He carried a short-handled mattock, a coil of hemp rope, and a lantern borrowed from the caretaker of the Ross County Courthouse. The entrance had been closed with fitted limestone blocks, mortared shut, and then covered in sod. No marker, no placard, nothing to indicate that anyone official had ever been here at all. By the time Morrow climbed back out that evening, his clothes were covered in a fine red ochre powder that would not fully wash out for 3 days. He had lost 1 hour of time he could not account for, and he was carrying a single object in his canvas bag, an object he would describe, in the written account he left behind, as something that no tool made in this century had any business creating. When he finally spoke about what he had seen, the first thing he said was that the chamber was not empty. The second thing he said was that it had not been empty for a very long time. The official county record states that the Mound 7 site near the North Fork of Paint Creek was surveyed, documented, and closed due to structural instability, following a partial collapse in 1865. A routine administrative action. That is the official version. What that record does not mention is Elias Morrow's written account, filed with the Chillicothe Scioto Gazette in November 1876, and never reprinted. Morrow was not an eccentric. He was not a drunk or a dreamer. He was a 44-year-old licensed land surveyor and cemetery registrar who had handled the legal documentation of more than 600 burials across Ross and Pike counties. He had signed affidavits. He had appeared as a witness in county court on 4 separate occasions, and his testimony had never once been questioned. Within 6 days of the Gazette piece running, the newspaper's editor received a formal letter from the Smithsonian Institution's Bureau of Ethnology, requesting that all remaining copies of that issue be forwarded to Washington. The stated reason was the preservation of sensitive archaeological materials. Within 3 weeks, Morrow had been dismissed from his county registrar position. The reason given was a clerical error from 1872 that had apparently gone unnoticed for 4 years. He died in 1879. He was 47 years old. The official cause was a fever. He had no history of illness. Before we go further, if you find these buried investigations as fascinating as I do, hit subscribe so the next one finds you when it drops. The algorithm tends to suppress this kind of research unless you tell it otherwise. Now back to Elias Morrow and what he found at the bottom of that mound. To understand what happened at Mound 7 in Chillicothe in 1876, we have to go back, not just a few years. We have to go back to a time that the history books have quietly simplified into a single sentence. The Hopewell people built mounds. What that sentence leaves out would fill volumes. The Hopewell culture, active in the Ohio River Valley between roughly 100 BC and 500 AD, constructed earthworks of a scale and geometric precision that professional surveyors in the 19th century could not fully explain. The Newark earthworks, a complex of connected geometric shapes covering 4 square miles, was aligned to track the 1806-year lunar cycle. Not approximately, precisely, within fractions of a degree. The official history tells us these were ceremonial burial mounds. Some of them certainly were. But in the years following the Civil War, As railway construction and land development tore through central Ohio, workers kept encountering chambers that did not fit the burial model. Chambers with stone floors, chambers with ventilation shafts, chambers with artifacts that the Smithsonian Institution quietly collected, cataloged, and then never displayed. Elias Morrow knew this territory. He had grown up 6 miles from the Mound City complex, and his father, a stonemason named Garrett Morrow, had worked on the partial excavation of a mound in 1842 that produced what a local physician described in a letter as skeletal remains of unusual proportions. That letter passed through 3 private hands before disappearing from the historical record entirely. What set Elias Morrow apart from every other man who had worked near these sites was this. He kept copies of everything: surveying notes, correspondence, handwritten ledgers. He had inherited his father's habit of preservation in a county where official records had a way of going missing. There is a growing body of independent research suggesting that the official history of the Ohio Valley, particularly the period between 1840 and 1890, is incomplete in ways that mainstream archaeologists have declined to engage with seriously. Photographs exist of artifacts removed from Ohio mounds that do not appear in any published Smithsonian catalog. Dimensions recorded in field notes by Bureau of Ethnology agents do not match the dimensions published in their official reports. This is where Elias Morrow's account connects to a pattern that is much larger than one sealed mound in Ross County. Morrow's account, published in the Scioto Gazette on November 14, 1876, described entering the mound through a passage approximately 4 feet high and 7 feet wide, lined on both sides with fitted sandstone slabs that he measured at an average thickness of 9 inches. He estimated the passage at roughly 22 feet in length before it opened into a central chamber. The chamber was circular. He paced the diameter at 31 feet. The ceiling, at its apex, was approximately 14 feet from the earthen floor. It was supported by 8 vertical wooden posts, each one still standing, each one of a diameter, he noted, that no single man could wrap his arms around. In the center of the chamber was a stone platform, rectangular, approximately 8 feet by 4 feet, raised about 18 inches from the floor. On and around this platform, Morrow documented 5 objects. 3 were ceramic vessels he did not recognize, heavily decorated, intact, stoppered with fitted stone caps. 1 was a copper artifact of unusual size, flat, engraved with a geometric pattern of concentric circles, approximately 24 inches across. The 5th object was what he placed in his canvas bag. He did not fully describe the 5th object in the Gazette piece. He said only that it was worked from a material I cannot identify, by a method I cannot account for, into a form that suggests a purpose I am not prepared to state in print. The Scioto Gazette issue of November 14, 1876, a 4-page weekly broadsheet, circulation approximately 1,200, ran Morrow's account under the headline, "A Remarkable Discovery Near the Paint Creek Mounds." A surviving copy exists in the private collection of a historical society in Chillicothe. It is not digitized. The Smithsonian's Bureau of Ethnology correspondence logs for November and December 1876, available on microfilm at the National Anthropological Archives, contain a reference to an outgoing letter to the Gazette, dated November 19, 1876. The letter itself is listed as not retained. The Bureau's published report on Ohio mound excavations for 1876 to 1877, a 214-page document with hand-drawn plates, makes no mention of Mound 7 near the North Fork of Paint Creek. The site is not listed, not mapped, and not referenced. For a bureau that cataloged hundreds of minor sites that same year, the omission is not an oversight. It is a decision. Now consider the pattern. Moundsville, West Virginia, 1838. A physician named James W. Clemens documented the removal of skeletal remains from the Grave Creek Mound that he estimated at over 7 feet in height. His account was published in a local newspaper. The Smithsonian later described the find as an exaggerated account. No skeletal remains from that excavation are held in any accessible public collection today. Newark, Ohio, 1860. A quarrying crew broke into a sealed chamber beneath the Newark earthworks and reported finding a stone tablet inscribed with a script that did not match any known Native American writing system. The tablet was examined by 3 academics, photographed once, and then transferred to a private collection. Its current location is unknown. Miamisburg, Ohio, 1869. A survey team hired by a railroad company opened the base of the Miamisburg Mound and found a second chamber below the primary burial level. Their field report was filed with the State Geological Survey. Within 2 years, that report had been removed from the public archive. The reason given was misfiling. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern. Within 30 days of Morrow's Gazette piece, the Bureau of Ethnology had initiated contact with both the newspaper and with Ross County officials. The Bureau's stated mission was scientific preservation, but what followed was not preservation. Morrow's county position was eliminated. The mound site was recovered and resodded, according to a brief note in the county surveyor's logbook from January 1877. A notation in that same logbook, in a different hand, reads simply, "Site closed per federal correspondence." The Bureau stood to lose something specific if Morrow's account was taken seriously: the credibility of its own published framework. Since the early 1870s, the Bureau had been systematically arguing that the mound builders were the direct ancestors of contemporary Native American tribes, a finding that had significant implications for land policy, for treaty negotiations, and for the federal government's justification of westward expansion. Evidence of a more complex, possibly distinct, pre-contact civilization in the Ohio Valley was not merely inconvenient, it was politically catastrophic. But here is what makes Morrow's account different from every other suppressed mound report from this period. In 1912, 36 years after Morrow's death, a retired Bureau of Ethnology field agent named Calvin Sprague gave a recorded interview to a historian at Ohio State University. The interview transcript, 22 pages long, is held in the university's Rare Books and Manuscripts collection. In it, Sprague, by then 71 years old, and described by the interviewing historian as entirely lucid and apparently in good conscience, stated that he had personally visited the Mound 7 site in December 1876, 6 weeks after Morrow's article ran. He was sent, he said, not to excavate, but to verify the closure. What Sprague described in that 1912 interview matches Morrow's account in specific detail he could not have known from the Gazette piece, because the Gazette piece never described the interior of the chamber. It described only the entrance. If Morrow was telling the truth, then Sprague's account does not just corroborate it. It confirms that the Bureau of Ethnology had direct internal knowledge of what was inside that chamber. and chose to say nothing for the next 4 decades. The Bureau of Ethnology has never adequately addressed the gap in its 1876 to 1877 Ohio Survey report. It has never explained why a site significant enough to warrant a formal letter to a small circulation county newspaper was not listed in the published findings that same year. It has never explained why the correspondence related to that letter was listed as not retained in an archive that routinely preserved far more trivial outgoing correspondence from the same period. It has never explained how a county registrar with a clean 20-year record came to be dismissed for a 4-year-old clerical error in the same month that his published account attracted federal attention. Why would the Bureau pay the administrative cost of suppressing an account if the account described nothing more than a standard burial chamber? Why does Calvin Sprague's 1912 transcript, a document held in a public university archive, appear in no published history of Ohio mound excavations, despite naming specific Bureau personnel and specific dates? Why would Elias Morrow, a man whose entire livelihood depended on his professional reputation, risk that reputation on a fabricated account in a county newspaper with a circulation of 1,200? These questions don't go away because institutions refuse to answer them. For the 3 years between his dismissal and his death, Morrow attempted to get his full account into print, including a description of the 5th object. He approached 2 publishers in Columbus. He wrote to a professor of antiquities at Ohio University. He sent a letter to a journalist at the Cincinnati Enquirer who had previously written about mound discoveries. None of them responded in writing. One of the Columbus publishers, according to a brief mention in his own correspondence held at the Ohio History Center, wrote in a letter to a colleague that he had received a communication from a gentleman in Chillicothe that I thought best not to pursue. He did not explain why. Morrow died in February 1879. He was 47 years old. The listed cause was typhoid fever. His neighbor, a woman named Adelaide Prentice, who would live to be 91, told her granddaughter decades later that Morrow had been in good health the week before his death, that he had come to her door to return a borrowed tool, and that he had said, she remembered this specifically, "I have found someone who will listen." There is no record of who that person was. The Mound 7 site still exists. It sits on private farmland approximately 4 miles northwest of Chillicothe, on a property that has changed hands 6 times since 1877. The current landowner, reached by a researcher in 2019, said she had never heard of any mound on the property. She described the area in question as a natural rise in the backfield. If you ask the Ohio History Center about Mound 7 near the North Fork of Paint Creek, they will tell you the site is not in their registry. That is technically accurate. The site was never formally registered because it was closed before it could be. And somewhere beneath that rise in the backfield, behind a passage lined with 9-inch sandstone slabs, on a stone platform in a circular chamber held up by posts no single man could wrap his arms around, the other 4 objects remain, exactly where Elias Morrow left them. The official record tells us that the mound builders of Ohio were fully understood by the 19th century, that their artifacts were carefully preserved, and that the Smithsonian's work in the Ohio Valley was a model of scientific integrity. What the witnesses, the missing correspondence, and the gaps in the published reports tell us is something quieter and more unsettling. That someone decided what the public needed to know, and decided it early. These stories survive because people like Elias Morrow wrote things down, and because people like you refuse to accept that the official version is the complete version. History doesn't disappear when it's buried. It disappears when no one looks for it. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Next week, I'm pulling a thread that connects the Ohio Mound suppression directly to the Smithsonian's internal correspondence from 1881. A letter that names 3 specific sites, 3 specific agents, and uses a phrase that has no business appearing in a scientific document. Material not suitable for public interpretation. You won't want to miss it.